Okay, so why do a buyer consultation? I'm going to start back up here. As in Keller Williams, we're always preaching about lead gen, but once we find the lead, it's all about progressing them through the next steps of the sales process. And finding the lead is one thing, and then getting them to the appointment is the next. And of course, once you have the appointment, getting them a signed contract, a buyer representation agreement if they're a buyer, or a listing agreement if they're a seller. So the appointment really just shows the level of commitment that a prospect is willing to make in their own search. So when you can get them to actually sit down, dedicate time to you, that's really valuable. A buyer consult also allows you to build trust and rapport with the prospect. Learn all the details you have about your buyer, communicate your value to a prospect. And I'm going to go through all of these kind of in a bit more detail over the next couple slides. But it is a really big value add, and out of the end of it as well, you can really control the next steps in the sales process and kind of show them that you're taking the lead on this, rather than kind of when we're starting out, it's really the buyers that we feel are taking the lead, like in the example that I gave of when we first got registered and we met our first buyer. Building trust and rapport with the prospect. So Jeb Blunt, he's a sales coach and an author. He's actually one of my favorite kind of sales authors. I've read a few sales books. He runs a company called Sales Gravy. But he says basically an advisor needs to answer 5 unspoken questions of every prospect. And these questions are: do I like you? Do you make me feel important? Do you listen to me? Do you get me and my problems? And do I trust and believe you? And I think these are all kind of really important things to consider, especially when, home buyers, home sellers have so many options as far as, realtors go. Everyone knows at least a couple people. And kind of through a buyer consultation, you can answer a lot of these questions, by being interested and asking the right questions of your prospects. And I've also kind of learned through my experience in the business is that client satisfaction is not necessarily based on the result on getting them a home. It's actually how your clients felt about the process. So through the buyer consultation, we can inform them, explain to them everything that they could expect that might happen throughout the sales process, because not all deals go smoothly. And basically let them know that, we have their back. I find that there's a lot of value in that. A buyer consult can be done in person or virtually. I've done both. I personally find that an in-person consultation is preferred, just to me, just because it is that extra level of commitment. Anyone can kind of dial in onto their iPhone, when they're out and about. But actually sitting down and meeting someone at a place, driving somewhere, maybe it's a coffee shop, maybe they're coming over to your market center, wherever, there is additional value in that, and just shows an additional level of commitment. And kind of to start off with the buyer consult, obviously it depends on how well you know this person, but I always start with a little bit of small talk. Maybe if you're meeting at a coffee shop in the area that they expressed interest in, ask them how familiar they are with that area. But kind of as you kind of go through that small talk, I start off with a self-introduction. So I actually have a picture of myself and my family, and let them know a little bit about myself, my years in the business, maybe my familiarity with that neighborhood that we're in. Just tell them a little bit about myself so that they can get to that place of, do I like you? Because if they don't know anything about you, then it's a little bit kind of, how can you kind of like someone, right? I mean, people can give off a good vibe, but I always like to start off that way. But everyone to each their own. Any questions so far? Cool. Okay, learn everything about your prospect. And this is the really good part about sitting down and meeting rather than doing things over the phone, where things can pop up, because you can really get down without distractions and ask the really important questions. I always like to start off with some pretty open-ended questions. So I usually start off like, tell me about your home search. And I just try to be quiet as they're going through without getting too much into the weeds, because people like to talk about their home search for 5 minutes. How long they've been looking, where they've been looking. They'll usually disclose their budget, the style of home that they're looking for, things like that. And sometimes they won't. Like sometimes they'll be pretty honest, and they're very, very early in their home search process. And it's like, well, I'm going to get married, and we're going to be combining our budgets and etc. And from there you can kind of take it into the more specifics, but always as well, because I find the buyer consult is most valuable to first-time home buyers. But why are they looking to buy? Why is now the right time to buy? And understanding their timelines as well, and understanding potentially if they're considering other places. I mean, this has happened to me actually a couple of times in my relatively short real estate career, but I have had first-time home buyers just drop off, and it was because they were considering other areas because Toronto has just become so expensive. So if you're prepared for that kind of that client satisfaction, I guess our own client satisfaction goes the other way as well, where we'll be a little bit upset with we won't have the most satisfaction with having worked that client if after 4 months they decide that they're going to move out to Ottawa or something like that, or Hamilton. So knowing that upfront is good, and it can also maybe help them come to that decision earlier on if it's coming to educating them on price and value on a home. So I also like to ask, in their own words, like describe the home you're looking for, and then they might specify a style. They love open concept, modern, in white and black, something like that, with light floors, and listening to the key words of what they're saying and how they're describing it. And others might just say, well, 3 beds, 2 baths, good sized backyard in the west end of Toronto, and then things like that. Yeah. Hey, Michelle.
Hey, Jonathan. I have a question regarding that. I find sometimes I'll tell buyers about that same thing and ask them what they want. And then we go into, have they been pre-qualified and where they're at with the money on that? And then they go, oh, I can't afford a fixed up place. It's out of our budget kind of thing. They want everybody who's a buyer or a new buyer or whatever wants, especially a new buyer who hasn't really known the market, feels like, yeah, I want to ask for the world. And then we narrow down to the talk about money. So do you bring this up ahead of the money talk, or do you find, or I sometimes find it's then discouraging because then it's like a huge letdown because I can actually only afford a condo maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think in this part, you just let them talk, right? You let them describe their dream, because that's what they're passionate about. That's what kind of got them to meet with you. And kind of actually sort of following this discussion on their home, I do go through kind of what their budget actually can afford them. Like, hey, let's look at homes in the areas over the last 2 months that have sold in your budget and what these homes look like. And obviously, if they're saying, oh, I want a detached house that's open concept, completely renovated, in Toronto, 3 bedrooms, whatever, and my budget is 900, then I don't want to, you don't want to smash their dream too early, right? And so, I think that kind of, you do have to get them to reality and kind of have some solutions for them at the end of that as well. I know, Michelle, like I'm sure you've done renovations. You know how far like actually just a coat of paint can go, right? So, and changing hardware in some doors and some cabinets, and that can really take a home quite far. And if you have any examples of that, like even pictures wise, but basically let them know that you can solve their problems, you can help them fulfill their dreams, because ultimately I feel like that's what we're here to do, right? Like we're here to help them achieve their goals, right? Like that's the role of a salesperson, I really feel. And so kind of as I progress through it, and they're describing everything to me based off of these open open-ended questions I've asked, I do go into more detail, right? So what's your budget? Have you got pre-approved? And was this a full mortgage pre-approval with a rate hold and paperwork? And you have that paperwork, you have a copy somewhere in your email, or was it something that you just did online with an online calculator? Because that's not a proper pre-approval. And I think that, once you kind of start to see how prepared they are, then you can kind of, kind of at what level of the search there really are. So is there anything that worries you about your home search? If we found a home that you liked, this week, and this could be, this week, this month, would you be prepared to make an offer? And then I think kind of once you have that understanding of like, we're just kind of bought, to quote Arrested Development, buy curious, rather than they're actually ready. But that helps you understand where they actually are emotionally and mentally in that process. And this is a question that I've found to be kind of useful, especially kind of when you're working with different maybe types of people with different personalities. But for some people, getting a deal is really important. It makes them feel good about the process. And for others, it's finding the right home and winning it within their budget. That's what feels good about it. So I ask, what's more important in general? Do you find that finding the right home or getting a deal? And this is something that I also ask before we write an offer, because you don't want to go against your client's desires and wishes. So this has kind of helped me a couple of times in making sure that at the end of it, whether they're either overpaying, underpaying, or whatever, or risking getting the home, that they do feel good about it at the end of it. As well, I kind of go through with the buyer representation agreement, working with the realtor. Have you worked with an agent before? Are you considering other agents? And are you considering continuing your search on your own? So where do I stand? You get a pretty good understanding of that as well. Like if they are considering other agents, if maybe when you've met them, perhaps you met them at an open house or something like that. If they've been actually interacting with someone else for some time, and kind of how you stand with respect to the other options they might be considering. And then as well, I find this interestingly, even sometimes with sellers, people who have bought, they're not actually aware, they don't actually know that buyer agents aren't paid by the buyers themselves, but by the sellers. So I do bring that up. Are you aware of how buying agents are paid? And then we got to go through the buyer representation agreement. And I'm like, okay, so this is actually how you hire a buying agent. And at the end of that, this is dependent on everyone's whole process, that's completely on their own. But I say that, generally, I will go out with a buyer a couple of times because they probably need to be educated on what they can actually afford in the neighborhoods they're considering. And from there, they'll make the decision on whether they feel comfortable proceeding in the purchase of a home. But after, my second time of going out, after kind of getting you educated, I expect that you would sign this for us to continue working together. And so for some people, it's literally, for us to see any homes, you need to sign this buyer representation agreement. But, right here is when you kind of would set the expectation in place. And then you also will give yourself permission to kind of go back and ask that buyer, and they know what to expect following the first or second showing, or, at the end of the consult of what you're going to be dropping into them to sign. And I find this way, it's a little bit less confrontational. It's a little less, all right, you sign this now, but, everyone to each their own. Do whatever you feel is most comfortable with yourselves. Any questions on that?
I got a question, Jonathan. So do you find them, I know it's a lot easier to do it up front, but then sometimes people feel like, oh, I don't want to commit just yet. And then what do you do? And then I'll sometimes go, that's fine. But when we go to the showings, I'll need to have a signature before I, show you the first place. And why don't we do something like, if they feel like less committed and they just don't want to sign anything, what things do you usually do?
Yeah, I think that's okay. I find that people are generally going to be honest with you on their intentions, as long as you're honest with what yours are. So If they say, well, I mean, I'm actually not sure that I want to buy anything yet. I'm not even sure if I want, like, I'm gonna like any of these homes, because I am actually considering moving out to Hamilton, let's just say, as an example. And you know, if, that'd probably be too far for you. Then I think that's actually very reasonable for them to say that. And I'm like, okay, that's fair. Like, let's go out and see if we can actually accomplish what you want to do before you sign anything with me. And that's what I do as well. Because, you know, let's date before we get married, kind of like that. I think Sean Provencher has said that, or someone else in Flipspace has said that. And I'm not someone that puts too much pressure on that, but I kind of, at the end, I go through one other, like the quickie buyer consult, which is like when you do come across an internet or open house, like a sign call and lead, and they're like, show me this house. And that's, in those instances, I do tell them up front that, you know, in order for me to show you this house, you're going to have to sign a buyer representation agreement that's exclusive to this house. And potentially that's what you can say as well. Like, you know, for any of these 5 homes that I'm going to show you on this education tour, I'm just going to ask that you sign an exclusive representation agreement and list all these 5 homes in the Schedule A. And that's just if you decide to move forward. But otherwise, you know, you're not bound to me in any other means. And that might be something that you feel comfortable with. But it kind of depends on how, I guess, I don't want to say pushy, but how tied you feel that you need to be to this prospect, right? And how fleeting they feel. Because if they seem fleeting, I don't know if you're going to be able to hold on to them by getting them to sign, by forcing them to sign something, or saying that, you know, this is the way it is. So yeah. Hi, Rita.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks. Oopsie. Hi, sorry. I have a question related to the same topic. I have a sense that most of the times the buyers, they are feared of committing to anyone. So I just, some buyers even ask me the question, what if I'm not happy? How can I back out? What options do I have? How would you respond to those kind of questions?
Yeah, I've mentioned this to people, but you know, I say, like, listen, if you're unhappy, I'd hope that you feel freely to talk to me. If you do feel that I'm not able to show you properties in time or something like that, I mean, we can terminate the agreement. I don't want you to leave feeling unhappy. And I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but there actually is a termination of a buyer representation agreement through ORIA. And you can either bring that up to kind of ease their minds in knowing that they have that option if they need to execute. But I mean, I find that if you're I'll tell you kind of an experience with mine that I had. I was helping some, like, they had never brought up anything with regards to a rebate. We had a buyer representation agreement signed, and they, until I think it was like for like 4 months, and I guess they learned of a rebate around 3 months, and they waited for the buyer representation agreement to expire before signing with a different buying agent. So if at some point that offered a rebate. So if at some point you know, they want out, they can usually get out, or they're going to kind of get out. So how do I address that? I just kind of, I would probably go that route and just basically explain, like, they have options. If they're unsatisfied with me, I mean, I'm always open to constructive criticism, and you know, I've never had a time where I couldn't show properties to someone, and if there were, then I usually have another buying agent to fill in, like on short notice. So that's usually been the ways that I've done it. So I don't know if that helps.
Great, thank you very much. That helps. Yes.
Okay. Great. So I guess if there's no other questions, I'll just continue moving on. Okay, so kind of in educating your prospect and showing your value, I do go through financials with my potential buyer clients. So the first thing that I actually go through is understanding kind of the mortgages and the true monthly cost of home ownership. And I think this is, I'm not sure if we have many newer agents here, but understanding this is really valuable in being able to understand kind of how banks qualify people actually. So I have a mortgage calculator that I actually use. Let me just figure out how to share this. So it looks like this, but this is just kind of an example where and I can send this to you guys. Actually, it's in the Google Drive folder there, but it's a pretty simple mortgage calculator. And feel free to take it, rip it off, whatever. You can put in your own information there. But you put in your maximum home purchase price. So I have here as $1 million, your annual income, your down payment, and then you'd have your interest rate. I put like 3.5% for to simulate fixed rate mortgage right now, 30-year amortization rate. And I explain what all these terms are, and kind of through the explanation and talk through, it kind of reassures them that I really do know what I'm talking about, especially if you're working kind of with a first-time home buyer or someone who just hasn't had to deal with a mortgage in a long time, and that in the event of they find a home that's slightly out of their budget, I can kind of look at the numbers quickly, but they'd still want to kind of go back to their bank to make sure that everything is proper. So in here, I also discuss the stress test, how this is kind of like what the banks will qualify you at, but not the actual mortgage payment. So in this example, I have $1 million house with a 20% down payment. If for example they said that I've saved up $150,000 and I actually make $200,000 a year. We can see right here that the down payment required is 20% for purchases of $1 million and above. So really, their purchase price will be $999,999. But you just kind of in showing them all these things, then it would also address kind of any concerns that they have that you would not be able to guide them through in the home buying process. So I do find this is really helpful. And it also clarifies a couple of things with them in the true cost of home ownership, because there is there's the amount that the banks qualify for, and they kind of do the rough calculations of how much the monthly mortgage would be. But when actually seeing the numbers, especially if you combine them with whatever outstanding debts that they might have on their car loans, student loans, etc., it's pretty eye-opening for some buyers. And actually, when they come out of it, they realize like, what, actually, I probably feel comfortable with the budget a little bit lower. And I think that kind of goes a part way in just making sure that they feel comfortable, protected, and covered. So we'll kind of go back to 200 and 160. Through here, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with GDS, TDS, but basically GDS stands for gross debt service. And it basically says that your before tax income should cover roughly no more than 1/3 of your home expenses, and that's based off the stress test amount. And here we see it's 5.5%. So here we're at 38.5, which is a little bit higher than 35%. And I do say 35% gross debt service guideline. Consult with a bank or a mortgage broker. And for total debt service, it says that no more than roughly, I think it's 42% of your before tax income should go towards your home expenses and all your outstanding financial obligations. So, loans, spousal support payments, all that stuff. And so based off of these figures, 160,000 combined income, let's just say it's a couple, and a $200,000 down payment, they should be kind of in line with being able to afford $1 million home. But their true monthly home costs, and I usually put like $100 per month on their water bill, home insurance, gas costs, etc., come out to $47.64. And sometimes when you look at that and then they're like, well, I'm only paying $2,000 a month in rent right now, and they're like, do we really want to spend that much? And I know that's kind of scary. Like that seems like you're shooting yourself in the foot. But again, I mean, we're here as advisors and, trying to make sure that our clients are protected and are aware of what they're getting into. So that's kind of part one of the finances. The only thing that I don't have on here are the closing costs, but there's land transfer taxes calculators online, multiple places, and your lawyer fees, and then the home inspection if they so decide to do so. So that's pretty easy to calculate on your own. Let me go back to this. Okay, so the next thing that I do educate them are on sales terms. So how properties are listed and sold in today's market. So being really upfront. A lot of buyers might come in and they're like, well, I saw this home. It's a 3-bedroom detached home on a 50-foot lot in very great area, and it's only listed at $799. So I mean, my budget can go to $850. So I think I have a stand a chance at buying this home. Let's buy this one. And they're not really kind of aware of how properties are listed and sold in today's market, and how market comparables are really important, and the progression of how markets move is really important, and the momentum they have. So kind of explaining the two different high-level ways that properties are sold. Obviously the offer date, and then taking offers anytime, and kind of educating on that side of it, but also how you evaluate properties, right? How do you look for market comps? What do you look at? And going through that, and maybe you have an example with a couple properties, right? And how you would do that. If you can show them either prepared or in real time how you do that, it shows, again, your value and your knowledge and your expertise. So what terms and conditions are typically included and expected in today's market, and how you will protect your clients. So obviously on an offer date, going in strong with no conditions. But let's just say the property doesn't have a home inspection and it's an older property. Is there anything that you can put in your Schedule A to protect them? I've seen some in my offers, it depends on the property, but I do try to put in some explicit terms that state that as far as the sellers are aware, that there is no water penetrating into the basement. There's no water damage caused by leakage into the roof, things like that, that will protect them in the event that there is no home inspection. And that as well, it shows that you can guide them through this process, providing them the right clauses that they need to for the things that they might be worried about in the worst case situation happening. As well here, I will explain to them that the deposit they're going to need, and this kind of sometimes, especially when you're starting out working with a buyer and they find a home and they're like, oh, I love this house, and they're not quite prepared to execute on it, even if they do have the money, but it's away somewhere else. But like, they're going to need the money available to deliver that deposit within 24 hours of the accepted offer. So it gets them ready to be able to act when they do find the right home. And basically, you can tell them, like, if it's stuck in a Tangerine bank account, you have whatever, $100,000 in a Tangerine bank account. It's going to take a week for that to be even moved to a major bank. So you should actually get that moved, like, tomorrow or today if you can. And as well, like, what to kind of expect with multiple offer competition, what is typically included and excluded in the sale of a property, like chattels and fixtures, and then as well, just irrevocable periods and how you can use that either to their advantage or how it sometimes doesn't necessarily work out with, let's just say, a 24 or 48 hour irrevocable, and there's multiple offers that eventually come out of it. So yeah, so that's kind of some things that I go through, like in a very detailed way. And it's pretty eye-opening, I find, for a lot of buyers who kind of haven't been in touch with how the market has been moving over the past couple of years. So there is a lot of value in this. And then the last part that I go through in detail is the agreement of purchase and sale. Just based off of my own experience, when I bought my own first house, it was a real fixer-upper, but I didn't know that the APS was actually contractually binding. So I was like, I mean, I bought and used cars online. I bought and like, just fun stuff growing up, like musical equipment growing up online. And you could put out an offer and whatever. But after I bought my first house, and I was like, oh, there's actually not an out to this. Like, there's no way that I can just cancel. It's like, no, this is a contract, So that is also very helpful for people to know. And that, once they've signed and it's been accepted, you have to execute as per the contract. But as well, in educating them, you can explain kind of what happens when an offer is received by the listing agent. They're basically going to wave it around to everyone that's showed the house and say, hey, we got this offer, to try to get multiple offers to come in and compete for them. Basically how a sign back or a counter offer potentially works, what terms are the strongest negotiating items. And then as well, like, after an offer has firmed up, a deal is firmed up, what happens if, let's just say, they find it's conditional on a home inspection, if, it reveals issues, are these things, what can you do with that? And I always explain to them, well, you can either walk away if you decide that you don't like the house, or you can try to negotiate it down, but the seller only has to agree, like they don't have to agree to those terms. And they can also just say no, take it as is, and that's up to the buyer to decide. Or even what happens if, a week before closing, they find out that something has been damaged or is non-functional, or potentially if the property doesn't appraise out. So this is kind of going back to how you can protect them with the proper CMA and the proper comparables, and make sure that, they don't put in crazy offers just to get a deal done, right? So, and, kind of bringing them to the awareness of, like, if they really like a house, but they don't quite, it doesn't appraise out, what might happen. And if they put in a crazy, stupid offer, and they have to go with a B lender or something like that. So this is also kind of really helpful and in explaining all of that. Cool. So any questions on this?
What are the biggest challenges you have, Jonathan, with doing the buyer's consultation?
Honestly, I don't have that many challenges with the buyer consultation. I find that they leave feeling pretty educated and also confident that I can help them out. But I personally have not been doing as many buyer consults as I did in my first couple of years, because I've been working with more people that are selling up, and I kind of go in and will take a lot of elements of the buyer consult into either the listing appointment or kind of divide up the listing appointment with the buyer consultation. So I kind of already have their commitment on the one side, on the sell side, and I don't have as much, I guess, challenges on the buyer side. But I do find that in knowing how to explain all this, it does make you sharper and as a salesperson, and it does make sure that you are aware of how to execute if you do run into issues and through all stages of the buyer side. And you can kind of speak to any issues that they might run into, be it financial or if something happens to the home that they just bought. So being able to talk about this and to speak to all these points is really valuable, not just in a buying consult kind of capacity.
What do you do when people tell you, oh, well, we're actually just interviewing you and a couple of other people?
I haven't had that happen. What for a buying agent, as a buying agent?
Yeah, like in 2017, I got that question. I mean, I got that asked of me, like, they were looking at me and a couple of other people. And
Right.
wow, that's the first time I've ever been interviewed as a buyer.
Right, right. Well, I think I'd probably just ask them, well, what are you looking for in a buying agent, right? What's most important to you? And then kind of go back to what some of these questions are. And I think for a lot of buyers, it's like, well, I just want to make sure that they're doing the calculations right, they're explaining the entire process right. But when it comes to putting the actual number on paper for the offer, and making sure that the CMA is done right, I always give them a range, right? And I say, like, how much do you like this home? And like, this is the range, this is the way the market is trending. These are in the last week and a half or so. These are what homes sold in your price range in this larger, greater area. So where do you think that this lines up with, let's just say if their offer is low or whatever. And so it's like, could it sell? Like, there's a small chance, but is it actually going to sell like that? And yeah, I mean, it's like, I feel like I can show them the value that I bring in protecting them and making sure that their interests are addressed. So I don't know. I kind of let the buyer consult kind of speak for itself, because I do go into probably way more detail than I know most agents do. But I do feel like, yeah, it does. I don't often run into issues with them not working with me for my lack of ability. If that makes sense.
Yeah. How long does your consultations usually run?
They can run for, I guess, as the shortest is like 45 minutes. The longest I've done is like 2 hours if they want to keep on talking and kind of going into more details of all the questions that they might have. But yeah, I'd say like average is like an hour and 15. Probably around there. Yeah.
And lastly, are you willing to share your spreadsheet? Because that's really interesting how you got that calculated. I usually bring a mortgage broker to talk with when I do mine.
Yeah, yeah, sure, totally. It should be in that Google Drive folder that I shared in the
Yeah, it is
chat.
there. I can see that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's totally that. Yeah, you can take that and put in your own, like, information there. Yeah. Hey,
Okay,
Roger.
I haven't gone through the whole thing, but yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're muted.
I just said thanks. I hadn't gone through the whole thing.
Oh, no worries,
In terms
Michelle.
of your drive, in terms of the drive.
Sorry about that. I thought I talked over someone by accident. I thought they were done. You there?
Yeah, no, I'm here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was like, okay, the spreadsheet, do you have all the formulas in there already? Like, I don't have to do anything to it?
Yeah, it's all in there. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. That's pretty awesome. Like, I love how you spread that out, laid that out for everyone. It definitely adds a ton of value for sure.
Jonathan, this is a content is a very thorough, very professional. I think it's very impressive. So what's a successful rate after each consultation?
So I kind of going back to, I did this consult a lot in my first 3 years of real estate. I find it really depends on where the buyer is in their process. Like, I've done this consult, and at the end of it, we realized that the buyer couldn't afford anything in their budget, or they couldn't afford what they wanted to buy in their budget, they decided that we're gonna save some more for whatever, and then ultimately they got priced out. And if I'd known what I knew now at that time, I didn't really understand how quickly markets move and how quickly things change. Then I probably would have put a bit more urgency on them to buy. So that happened really early on, and this kind of goes back with the types of leads that I was getting with my first brokers that I was with. But as far as like the ones that didn't end up working out, I found that the single reason that it didn't work out was was that, there was a couple that were asking for a rebate. And that's one thing that I was supposed to address, that it's not in the slides. But I mean, this is kind of a completely an agent decision on if they decide that they want to do rebates. I personally don't do rebates. I shouldn't say that I never do rebates, but it's something that, it should be a business decision. I do find that if you're starting out in your career, I don't know if there's other folks in this Zoom that are earlier on, and you start off by doing rebates, then you do become a discount agent, just because it's like you get really used to doing it early on. I'll say that I have one very good friend of mine that I've known since early university, who recently he bought a $2 million home. And one of the things was, he's like, okay, are you willing to give me a rebate, a kickback, right? And I told him I had to think about it, but I did think about it for a little bit. And when he was asking for, I think he was asking for like 0.5% on a 2.5% deal. And he said, like, listen, my parents are going to move over from overseas. They're actually going to move. My brother has to buy. My sister, like, we don't have any family agent. And I realized, like, okay, if I say no to him, then there's a good chance that I'm going to potentially lose out on all the business that his family has. It will potentially bring me. But also, like, throughout the years when he's been my friend, and two, he just wants to know that that I appreciate him as much as he appreciates me, because he's out in Vaughan and he knows a lot of other agents as well. And it's a, I guess, yeah, he's got a lot of options to consider, but he does appreciate me. And so that's how I approach that situation. But again, it's a business decision. And I think that in the future, if I were to consider doing a rebate again, I would put some high stipulations that they have to refer to me business for it to really be worthwhile for me to consider. But again, to each their own. I totally understand if folks don't think it's worth it, because in many instances it's not really worth it, especially if the deals are relatively small and they take a lot of time, and that's all time that you can spend doing more lead gen. So that are willing to pay the full commission fees. So that's generally the only times when it hasn't worked out, and that's been like 2 out of maybe, I don't know, 20. So yeah.
Jonathan, how did you draft up that rebate agreement? Is that a separate thing that you did, or was that just kind of like two buddies saying you can trust me?
So on that rebate as well, that's another thing where if you talk to an accountant, they're probably going to tell you that, like, if you actually want to, and this is something that you can tell them and be very, if you're going to work with someone, like, and you're going to offer a rebate, like, listen, I actually need to collect your social insurance number, and you need to be paid out as some sort of like contractor or something like that, because that's actually taxable income, believe it or not. And so it's like the only way that this would actually work is if you were to either get work done to your house and I were to pay for it, or something like that. And even gifts, like gift cards, those are taxable. That is taxable, considered taxable income. So a lot of people, they don't want to provide their social insurance. They don't want to have to pay taxes on that. So if you're going to give them cash, then I would definitely withhold the taxable amount on that, because you're going to have to pay and be liable to that tax amount. But tell them if you want this, it has to be either in these forms, and that could be work done to your home that I can pay for and I can write off through my own income, or maybe, it could be something like appliances or light fixtures or something like that. But those are really the only ways that I can give you the full amount. Otherwise, I give you cash, but I'm withholding probably about 50% of it to pay off my own taxes. Or you can give me your social insurance number and we can pay it out that way. And that's the way that I did it with him. I approached it with him.
Perfect, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so after we go through everything, next steps, I basically go through, pick some homes, take them out on a tour through a couple of neighborhoods, educate them on the homes, and research all the homes in advance. This is something where, you just, again, show your ability to identify and parts of the home, double brick homes, different types of, maybe like, let's just say the furnace, how you can identify its rough age. And like just the history of the home, the last time it was sold, when it was built. And maybe as you go through these tours, I also will identify like, oh, these couple homes on the street, they sold recently. And this just basically, this is like the next step following the buyer consult is taking them on this tour. And this just basically shows that, yeah, you are active, you know what you're doing, you know what you're talking about. And that's basically the next step progression that I take on the buyer consultation. Yeah, and the last thing that I just want to mention on just the two types of buyer consults. So the traditional sit down, which is the one that I've been kind of taking you guys through. So you've kind of established some contact. They are looking for some assistance. They're not really sure. Maybe they're confused. They're just starting out their home search. They want to get educated. And then the quickie. So this is kind of when you get a signed call in or an internet lead with no established prior contact. And this is, they just, can you show me this house, right? Like you're just actually someone that is a key holder to them at that point. So I don't go through this level of detail with them, but you meet in a public place, for maybe 10, 20 minutes. And you do this meeting for two reasons. One, for safety reasons, especially if you're a woman, but you're meeting a stranger off the internet or off the signed call in. So you want to see that they're a real person. You want to see their driver's license, all that stuff before. And then the other reason as well is like, you don't want to just show up there and show them a house and then they leave or they put in an offer with a different agent. So I always tell them on the phone, like, listen, I ask them if they're represented and tell them that you're going to sign a buyer representation agreement for the property that you're going to show them. But once you actually get to the coffee shop, again, start off with some small talk, realtor info, talk to them about the home search, show them the buyer representation agreement, get the signature for that home, and then see the home. And then, follow up with them following. But as you're going through the home as well, attempt to just build more rapport so that you can get the follow-up for the sit down, for the traditional sit down of the buyer consult. So that's basically it. I'm going to stop recording. Any other questions?
Hi, Jonathan. I have one more question for you. In the training, I learned that usually you have to, it's required by REBA that you have to check the buyer's identity. Do you do that? Or when you do the paperwork FinTrack, you do that kind of checking?
No, I do check the buyer's identity. Yeah, for sure. I ask for a copy of the driver's license and I actually take a picture of it. I asked them if I can take a picture of it. Just so I save a copy and I put it in my folder for that client's name. But I mean, it's like if you write down someone's name and you wrote it down wrong, then it's kind of like not really a valid buyer representation agreement. But you also kind of need the address that they're registered to as well. So it's important. So I do collect all their information.
It's prior to your buyer consultation, right? Or it's
no, I collect it at the time that they're signing the buyer representation agreement.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, okay, great, thanks. No more questions.
Okay, so if so if there's no more questions, that's it. I really appreciate everyone for coming out, and I hope that there was some value taken out of this.
I think it's wonderful.
But thank you for joining.
Good job, John.
Awesome. I hope you have a listing presentation, consultation, something.
I don't, but actually, if you ever want to do something, I found Philip was really, I sat down with Philip with one of the first listing appointments that I had when I joined KW, and I found that the insight that he was able to give me was really valuable. And yeah, we walked, from the moment that you walk through the door, kind of like what you should be doing. And yeah, it's definitely worth sitting down with him. You can let him know like, oh, I have this listing appointment. It's on Friday or something. And I'm sure, he'll be able to help you out.
Oh, okay. I missed that. I just messed up one this week. So yeah, okay. Thanks for the advice. I'll try next time.
Yeah.
Okay, great. It's great training.